She's my grandmother, man. What's she gonna do? Call the cops? Caleb's voice was smug, right before the crowbar struck her storage door. Inside, Evelyn quietly tapped her phone. That's exactly what I'm going to do. 7 minutes later, sirens lit up the driveway like Judgment Day. The boy she once cradled through nightmares was cuffed in her garden, and the legacy he tried to steal was already fireproofed in her hands. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The peach cobbler hadn't even cooled before Caleb spat on her shoe. It was a wet, deliberate act, like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one else had the guts to say out loud. Evelyn stood frozen beside the grill, her linen slacks sticking slightly to her thigh in the Georgia heat, as her 19-year-old grandson wiped his mouth and smirked like he'd just won something. "You're nothing now," he said, loud enough for the whole backyard to hear. "All you ever had was Granddad's money. And it's mine now, so maybe you should watch where you step." A few chuckles broke out from the cousins huddled near the patio cooler. Denise, Evelyn's daughter, Caleb's mother, stood across the lawn with her glass of boxed Chardonnay, lips twitching into a nervous smile that died halfway up her face. She said nothing, just took another sip and turned her back. Evelyn didn't move. Not at first. The sun bore down, highlighting every liver spot on her arms, every line carved by years of work, worry, and sacrifice. The silver chain around her neck, the one Richard gave her on their 30th anniversary, felt suddenly heavy, like it was choking the air out of her. She looked at her shoe. Beige leather, soft-soled, scuffed at the toe. Not new, not flashy, but clean. Always clean, not anymore. Without a word, Evelyn turned and walked slowly back toward the house, past the folding chairs, the laughter, the Bluetooth speaker blaring summer hits she didn't recognize. Her hand barely trembled as she slid the back door open and stepped inside. The air conditioning hit her like clarity. She moved through the kitchen, where half-prepped potato salad sat abandoned next to a stack of unused paper plates. Through the living room, where family photos hung in polite symmetry, but none from the years she'd raised Caleb, when Denise had been in and out of rehab and the boy had called her Mama Evie in his sleep. She climbed the stairs, gripping the railing tightly, not from weakness, but from restraint. Her bedroom door clicked shut behind her with surgical finality. She didn't sit. She didn't cry. Instead, she walked to the far corner of the room, to the old filing cabinet tucked behind the dresser. It was metal, olive green, with a faint dent on the bottom drawer where Richard had kicked it in frustration during a tax season long past. She hadn't opened it in years, not since Caleb had started high school and Denise had promised, through thin lips and crossed fingers, that things were finally stable. Evelyn knelt, her hands still steady, unlocked the top drawer. The key had been in her jewelry box all this time, resting next to a faded photo strip of her and Richard at Coney Island in 1973. Inside the drawer, order, color-coded folders, bank statements, trust paperwork, notarized addendums. Her husband had been meticulous about legacy, and she, former accountant, perpetual realist, had honored that, even when others didn't. She pulled out the thickest folder, McAllister Family Trust, Revocable Rights and Executor Notes. Evelyn opened to a page flagged in red ink. Richard's handwriting, as familiar as her own. Executor may reassign or revoke fund access pending conduct of beneficiaries or failure of guardianship to act in fiduciary interest. She smiled. Not sweetly, clinically. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was reconciliation, of numbers, of dignity. Outside, she heard Caleb rev the engine of his Dodge Charger, the one Evelyn had co-signed for. The one registered under a name he hadn't earned. She stood, folder in hand. Tomorrow she'd call someone. Not Denise, not Caleb. Someone who still understood what a signature meant, what a legacy deserved. But tonight she would wipe her shoe and begin subtraction. Morning came with the smell of old paper and lemon oil. Evelyn had left the trust folder open on her nightstand. She didn't sleep much, just stared at the ceiling fan as it spun slow and certain above her. By dawn, she had already brewed coffee, dressed in navy slacks and a clean white blouse, and set up shop at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and her reading glasses perched low. The McAllister Family Trust was older than Caleb, established in 1992, updated 6 times. Each clause told a story, some kind, some cautious, and there, buried in the middle of page 12, was the line she needed. Executor rights shall revert to surviving spouse upon the termination of provisional. Guardianship, provisional. That was the word. Richard had made Denise a temporary guardian of Caleb's trust. It had been a stopgap, an act of mercy during one of Denise's better months. But Evelyn had never fully signed off. She'd initialed with a conditional note in the margin. She found it now, in her own tight script, pending reevaluation upon child's 18th birthday. Caleb had turned 19 in April. Evelyn exhaled. Long, slow. Not relief, calculation. She picked up her phone and dialed the only estate attorney she trusted. A quiet woman named Hallie Myers, with a glass office in downtown Savannah and a reputation for knowing when to stay silent. Hallie didn't ask many questions. Just said, "Come in Tuesday. Bring everything." Evelyn clicked her pen twice and began listing documents. She moved like someone auditing a collapse. When the paperwork was organized into neat stacks and her coffee had gone cold, she slid open the bottom drawer of the cabinet. Not the trust folder this time. Something deeper. A manila envelope marked RLM, Notes and Letters. Inside were handwritten budget pages, tax returns, and one yellowing piece of legal paper. Richard's handwriting, slanted, bold. "Evie, if I'm gone before you, don't let them turn money into a weapon, especially not against you. Assets are tools, leverage, sometimes. But family is supposed to be the one thing you don't have to buy. If Denise ever forgets that, remind her. And if Caleb ever disrespects you, shut the gates. Period. R." She traced the period with her finger, not for sentiment, for precision. The appointment with Hallie lasted just under 2 hours. No small talk, just legal breathwork. "Yes," Hallie confirmed, "you still hold executor status. Denise's guardianship expired with Caleb's legal adulthood. You can amend distributions, freeze disbursements, and restructure your will as needed." Evelyn nodded once. By the time she left the office, the documents were signed, scanned, and backed up to encrypted cloud storage. Caleb's trust was no longer accessible to him. It had been moved into holding status, pending behavioral reevaluation, a polite way of saying, earned or lost, your choice. That night, Evelyn sat at her desk with the lamp on low. She opened her personal will and began crossing out names. She left the foundation clause, doubled the amount earmarked for the scholarship fund, added a clause granting her church a small endowment for youth mentorship programs. She scratched Caleb's name off the beneficiary list with a ruler. Clean. No hesitation. The pen glided through with finality. She paused only once when writing Denise's name, then underlined the phrase, "contingent upon full transparency of past withdrawals." Because this time, there would be no excuses, no hiding, and no forgiveness by default. She placed the new will in the fireproof safe beneath her desk, locked it, poured herself a half glass of sweet tea, and stood in the darkened kitchen, staring out at the quiet backyard. Same string lights still hung across the patio, same half-empty cooler probably forgotten in the sun, but something had shifted. Not the air. Her. Caleb didn't knock. He blew into the house like heat on linoleum, loud, fast, directionless. Evelyn barely had time to set her tea down before he stormed into the kitchen, his voice already raised, his face mottled with sunburn and entitlement. "You froze my account? Are you insane?" Evelyn folded her napkin calmly, placed it beside the saucer. "I didn't freeze it. I moved it. You can't do that." He slammed a palm against the counter, then pointed an accusing finger like a lawyer rehearsing for a camera crew. "That money is mine. Granddad left it for me. You're just bitter." Evelyn stood slowly, smoothing the front of her blouse. "If it was yours, Caleb, you'd be able to access it, but you can't, so maybe double-check your definitions." He blinked, half shock, half calculation. She could see him trying to regroup, reach for the next insult, the next play. "Do you even know how finances work anymore?" he sneered. "You're almost 80, for God's sake. You forget half the things you say. Maybe it's time someone did a wellness check before you screw up everything for the rest of us." From the doorway, Denise appeared. She wore her work scrubs, lavender and creased, and clutched her purse like it held her spine. "Mom," she said, voice teetering on forced calm, "can we please not make this worse than it is?" Evelyn turned to face her. "Worse than theft?" "It's not theft," Caleb barked. "It's family," Denise added quickly. "It's just, you're not being reasonable. You're not being fair." Evelyn chuckled, not from humor, but from muscle memory. "Then maybe we bring in someone neutral. Let an independent accountant go through the trust. See who's being fair." Denise's mouth clamped shut. Caleb backed a step. "No way," he said, shaking his head. "You want to drag strangers into this just because you're having some kind of breakdown?" "No breakdown," Evelyn replied. "Just an audit of behavior and books." That night, Evelyn opened a worn blue accordion file and began pulling every receipt she'd ever saved. The down payment for Caleb's car, every tuition check to the community college he'd never attended past semester 1, the therapy bills when Denise couldn't afford co-payments, the lease agreement for the off-campus apartment, the emergency fund she pulled from when Caleb crashed the first car, even the overdraft coverages she quietly paid off when Denise's salon went under for 2 months during the pandemic. She sorted them by year, clipped them into piles, and placed them into a large manila envelope labeled Verification Trust Disbursements. The next morning, she drove down to Pine Bank and Loan, an Old World local branch with a brass bell on the front door and ivy curling around the windows. The banker there, George Langley, had known her and Richard since the early 80s. George looked up from his desk and grinned. "Evie Carter, either you're here to make a donation or you're about to light someone on fire." "Possibly both," she said, and sat down. He examined the trust movement history with quiet precision. You've still got full control. You could move this thing to a separate holding firm if you want, lock it tighter than Fort Knox." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Let's prepare that, just in case." As she drove home, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced down. "Caleb McAllister 98 has tagged you in a post." She pulled into the driveway, parked, and opened the app. The video was 10 seconds, grainy footage from a holiday dinner last year. She was mid-sentence, pausing to remember a recipe name. Caleb's caption read, "Proof she doesn't remember basic words. Should she be managing a trust?" Her stomach didn't twist, her hands didn't shake. Instead, Evelyn calmly took a screenshot. Then she took another, and another, of the comments. The top one read, "LOL, this lady needs a conservatorship." The first thread unraveled on a Tuesday afternoon, beneath the soft hum of Evelyn's desktop monitor and the slow tick of the grandfather clock that had survived 2 floods and 3 generations. She was combing through archived emails, searching for a tuition receipt Caleb had claimed was never paid, when she noticed an unfamiliar account reference attached to a withdrawal line item. It didn't belong to the main trust. The routing number was different, the bank name unfamiliar. She leaned closer. The email had come from Denise's old work account, back when she briefly held a bookkeeping side gig for a friend's boutique. The timestamp put it 5 years back during a particularly fragile chapter, Denise's second stint in outpatient therapy, Caleb's high school graduation, the year Evelyn spent most nights worrying about overdraft fees and mortgage refinancing. The account in question was labeled McAllister Legacy Education Fund. Evelyn sat back in her chair. She'd never authorized that name, never seen those statements, and more importantly, never once heard of this fund. With methodical patience, she printed the email and its attachment, then highlighted the transaction list line by line. There were purchases disguised as education expenses, an academic retreat to Miami, a student tech upgrade that tracked back to a crypto investment app, and a repeated series of debit transactions from a boutique in Atlanta Evelyn knew didn't sell anything remotely related to college. These weren't one-off mistakes. This was a pattern, deliberate, hidden under the shade of good intentions and vague expense titles. She called Hallie Myers again. I need you to subpoena records from 2 secondary accounts linked to Caleb's social and any financial paperwork Denise might have submitted in relation to the trust, she said calmly. Hallie didn't ask why. 2 weeks later, a brown accordion folder landed on Evelyn's doorstep via courier. She waited until the house was silent before unsealing it, hands steady even as her chest tightened with each unscanned page. Page 3 held the first signature. Evelyn Carter. Digital, smooth, confident. Only it wasn't hers. She knew her penmanship like she knew her late husband's voice. Unmistakable, firm with caution. This wasn't that. This signature had been cut from a scanned copy of a 2006 tax form, pasted into a new document, a Hammersmith Vanny, plain as day. Her breath didn't catch. It compressed. Folded in on itself like a shutter being drawn. The next set of documents mapped 5 years of slow siphoning. Denise had set up the Legacy Education Fund under Evelyn's name as the founding trustee, routing it as a sub-account connected to the main family trust. The wording was slick, legal enough to look clean, but vague enough to bury accountability in the fine print. The money, originally intended for college expenses, had been rerouted into luxury charges, first-class airfare, hotel suites, designer clothes. There was even a $4,200 charge at a leadership retreat that, when Evelyn investigated further, turned out to be a week-long stay at a spa resort in Scottsdale. It was theft, not emotional theft, not philosophical betrayal, criminal, straightforward. And worse, it wore her name. She stood, walked to the sink, and ran the water over her wrists for a moment. Not to wash anything off, just to feel something real, something honest. That evening, she sat at Richard's old desk in the den, the same one where he'd signed their mortgage papers and once balanced a checkbook by candlelight during a power outage. She pulled out the side drawer and found the legal pad where she'd once helped him revise his trust notes. The pages were faded, but the ink held. She turned to a blank sheet and wrote only 2 words across the top. Begin extraction. This wasn't just grief anymore. It had calcified, refined itself into a clinical, focused resolve that didn't need theatrics or shouting matches, only numbers, facts, and the law. She picked up her pen again and wrote a second line underneath. No forgiveness without a ledger. Outside, the wind picked up. The backyard string lights swayed slightly in their hooks, casting long, tangled shadows on the grass. Tomorrow, Evelyn would call the fraud division, but tonight, she sat still in the quiet, letting the truth settle around her like armor, the kind you didn't wear to fight, just to finally stop being wounded. The salon smelled like heat, bleach, and lavender hairspray. It was mid-morning, and the glass storefront still bore condensation from the old HVAC unit, struggling against the Georgia humidity. Evelyn stepped inside quietly, her heels tapping against the faux marble floor, folder in hand, composure sealed tight across her face like lacquer. Denise didn't look up right away. She was hunched over the reception desk, checking appointment cards and texting with one acrylic nail tapping fast against the screen. "Give me a sec," she muttered, barely glancing at her mother. "We're short-staffed." Evelyn didn't respond. She placed the manila folder on the counter. Light, deliberate. Denise finally looked up. "What's this?" "Line items," Evelyn said, voice cool as a ledger sheet. "From the last 5 years. Funds marked for education, rerouted into handbags and digital coins, transactions disguised as school expenses, forged documents filed under my name." Denise blinked, and then she laughed, sharp, high, performative. "Oh, please, you're gonna come in here with your gotcha folder and accuse me of, what, spending a little too much on Caleb's future?" Evelyn didn't move. "His future doesn't come with spa receipts." Denise's smile faltered. "You don't know what it's like, raising a teenager alone, running a business." "I do know," Evelyn cut in, her voice firmer now. "Because I did it. While you were in group therapy and sleeping on couches that weren't yours, I was folding laundry after midnight and packing lunches with handwritten notes to keep him from falling apart. So no, I don't buy the martyr act." Denise's jaw tensed. "It wasn't theft. It was fraud," Evelyn said, calm as glass. "And sloppy." Denise folded her arms. You think anyone's gonna believe some cranky old woman over her own daughter? I don't need belief, Evelyn replied. I have documentation, IRS grade, and a lawyer with the patience of a saint and the appetite of a prosecutor. A pause stretched out between them like a drawn string. Evelyn opened the folder and slid a single page forward. Bank records, highlighted, annotated, forged. Denise's eyes scanned it, and Evelyn watched the exact moment performance slipped into panic. Mom, please. I've already frozen the accounts linked to the trust, and as of this morning, your business credit line? On hold. What? Evelyn nodded once. Your business is now under investigation for misuse of beneficiary-linked assets. You can't book appointments until your payment system is reviewed. Denise lurched from behind the desk and stormed to the back office, fumbling for her laptop. Evelyn followed at a slower pace, each step deliberate. When she reached the doorway, Denise was clicking through browser tabs with shaking hands. The salon's booking software had a red banner flashing at the top. Temporary lockout. Pending legal inquiry. Caleb will kill you for this, Denise hissed. He's already losing it over the trust. You're ruining everything. No, Evelyn said softly. I'm cleaning it. The next morning, the headline ran in clean serif font beneath a grainy photo of Evelyn holding a sheaf of papers outside the courthouse. Grandmother sues daughter, grandson for trust theft. The article was picked up by local radio, then republished on a legal blog. Within 24 hours, Evelyn's voicemail was full, half with encouragement, half with outrage. Anonymous numbers, voices calling her brave, others calling her a monster. She didn't listen to most of them. She listened to the message from Hallie. The suit is filed. Fraud, misappropriation, and forgery. The DA's reviewing. We're moving. Denise responded by hiring a PR firm out of Atlanta, aggressive, fast-talking, image-savvy. They put together a statement calling Evelyn's actions tragic elder volatility and painting Caleb as a traumatized young man blindsided by betrayal. A soft photo of Caleb with a therapy dog began circulating online. Hashtags appeared. Do you protect our elders twisted into do you pray for Caleb? Evelyn said nothing. Instead, she updated the donation page for the Richard L. McAllister Legacy Fund, added a new quote beneath the banner. This fund is not about blood. It's about honesty. Dignity is the only valid inheritance. That night, she sat at the edge of her bed, watching the cursor blink on an empty Word document, a memoir draft, title still undecided. The cursor blinked. So did she. Because in the next room, her landline rang. It was the local news station. They were requesting an interview, and this time, she was ready to speak. Evelyn noticed the video late on a Wednesday, when the sun had already dipped behind the pine trees, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. She had just finished folding laundry, soft cotton shirts, most of them hers now that Richard was gone, and had sat down with a cup of chamomile when her phone buzzed 3 times in quick succession. The first message was from Joan Adler, an old friend from the neighborhood book club. I'm so sorry. Just saw what your grandson posted. The second came from a former colleague's daughter. Sending this to you directly. You deserve to know. The third was a link. No comment. Just a URL and a red-faced emoji. Evelyn tapped it without hesitation. The video opened with a heavily edited montage of clips, grainy footage from past holidays, security camera footage stitched together with choppy transitions. Her voice, from an old voicemail she'd left about a forgotten casserole dish, had been auto-tuned and spliced to sound confused, erratic. Sweet Pota, what was I saying? Repeated in a loop, layered over trap music. The caption read, Breaking. My senile grandmother is coming for my future. Protect your trust funds, folk. Ah, Granny gone wild. In another cut, a freeze frame of her blinking slowly had been zoomed in and colorized to make her look almost ghoulish. One of the top comments underneath read, Somebody get this woman a conservator and a nap. Evelyn stared at the screen for a full minute, unmoving. Her tea cooled in her hand. Then, as calmly as she'd once balanced million-dollar spreadsheets for the county school board, she clicked the screenshot button. Once for the post, again for the comments, and again for the list of users sharing it. She opened a red file folder and slid in the freshly printed images. On the front, she labeled it in crisp block letters, "Digital Defamation Evidence, McAllister Case." When Hallie arrived the next morning, legal tote in hand, Evelyn already had the folder on the table between them. Hallie flipped through the screenshots silently, her jaw tightening with each page. "He's digging himself a very public grave," she murmured. "I'm not interested in burying him," Evelyn said evenly, "but I won't let him drag my name through the dirt either." Hallie looked up. "This is textbook libel, and paired with his financial dependence, we can file an elder abuse complaint before lunch." Evelyn nodded once. "Do it." That same afternoon, Evelyn sat down at her writing desk. She adjusted the camera on her laptop, straightened her blouse, and brushed a single flyaway strand of hair from her forehead. No makeup, no prepared speech, just her, framed by a window and a bookcase full of Richard's old economics textbooks. She hit record. "My name is Evelyn Carter," she began, her voice low but certain. "I'm 75 years old. I've been a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and for over 4 decades, a financial steward for both family and community." She paused. "And yes, I'm the woman my grandson is trying to humiliate on the internet." Her eyes didn't blink. "I want you to understand something. Age doesn't equal incompetence. Silence doesn't mean surrender. I've seen the videos, and I'm not surprised." Another pause. "I raised him, and now I have to unraise the damage." She held up a folder, different from the red one. This one was navy blue. Trust documents inside. Every dollar he spent, every lie he told, I kept the receipts, literally. She ended the video with a single sentence. "This is what accountability looks like, on paper and in public." Within 24 hours, the video had been shared over 30,000 times. Comments shifted. Granny Gone Wild became Granny with Receipts. Senior advocacy groups reposted it. AARP's legal outreach page shared it with the caption, "Age is not a liability, it's a record." Denise tried to issue a PR response, but it was too late. The meme had turned. By Friday, a second video surfaced. This one not from Caleb, but from a girl at his college. She'd dated him briefly, she said, before he asked to borrow money from her student account. She ended her video with, "I believed him too." Evelyn didn't gloat. She printed that one out as well, slipped it into a new folder, and then she reached for her landline, because the morning news had just requested a live interview, and she wasn't just ready. She was precise. The lights were warm, almost too warm, but Evelyn didn't flinch beneath them. The morning show's studio in Savannah was painted in soft coastal blues and buttercream yellows, clearly designed to soothe. But Evelyn hadn't come for comfort. She came for clarity. The host, a woman half her age with perfectly lacquered nails and a permanent expression of polite concern, introduced her with practiced poise. "Joining us this morning is Evelyn Carter, retired accountant, grandmother, and the woman at the center of a trust fund controversy that's been lighting up the internet this week." Evelyn sat upright, her blouse pressed, a single strand of pearls resting just at her collar. She didn't smile for the camera, but she didn't scowl either. Her gaze was steady. "Thank you for being here, Ms. Carter," the host said. "I'm not here for me," Evelyn replied. "I'm here for the truth." A monitor behind them displayed a now infamous meme. Caleb in a fur-lined jacket holding up a cocktail with the caption, "Trust Fund Tyrant in Training." The audience chuckled. Evelyn didn't blink. The host cleared her throat. "You've been accused of mismanaging family assets. What would you like the public to know?" Evelyn reached down, retrieved a thick navy folder from her bag, and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. She flipped it open with quiet ceremony. "These are the original trust contracts," she said, "signed, notarized, and reviewed annually by a certified estate attorney. My late husband and I created this trust to support our grandchildren's education, not their egos, and certainly not their public relations campaigns." She held up a single page, highlighted sections, her initials in the margins. "This clause," she tapped it, "states that misuse or misconduct results in reassignment of beneficiary rights. That's legal, not emotional." A murmur passed through the studio. The camera zoomed in. The host raised an eyebrow. "And have you exercised that clause?" "I have," Evelyn said, "with full authority. The trust has been restructured, funds redirected into something that can't be manipulated, a scholarship fund, one that supports students who know the value of what's given and what's earned." The next question was soft but pointed. "Do you have any regrets?" Evelyn's voice didn't waver. "Only one. I waited too long." The live studio audience applauded, not raucously, but with something deeper: respect. A woman in the third row dabbed at her eyes. Later that afternoon, the clip went viral. Granny Strong began trending on every major platform. TikToks flooded in, young women stitching Evelyn's interview with captions like, "Can this woman adopt me?" Twitter erupted with side-by-side comparisons of Caleb's smear video and Evelyn's calm interview. The comment consensus was unanimous. She'd won, not with rage, but receipts. Denise's salon took the first hit. Clients began canceling appointments, citing bad energy and not supporting fraud. A Yelp review appeared titled "Loyalty to Liars," accompanied by a screenshot of Caleb's mocking video. Within a week, the salon's Google rating dropped from 4.6 to 2.3. Denise tried damage control, offering discounts, running ads, even hinting at a rebrand, but the internet wasn't interested. Evelyn hadn't said a single unkind word about her daughter, and that silence landed louder than any attack. Meanwhile, Evelyn was busy elsewhere. With the guidance of Hallie and a small team of advisors, she launched the RLM Legacy Scholars Fund, named after her late husband. The application was simple: a 2-page essay and proof of enrollment in any accredited vocational, trade, or academic institution. In its first week, they received over 600 submissions. She read each one by hand. One, from a high school senior in Macon, simply said, "My grandmother raised me too. She taught me that respect isn't owed, it's shown. Thank you for showing us." Evelyn framed that line above her desk. By Friday, local outlets were requesting full segments. A national news anchor hinted at a sit-down special. Caleb, in turn, tried releasing a new video, an apology, but it flopped. The top comment read, "Too little, too entitled." And Evelyn? She didn't watch it. Instead, she lit a single candle beside Richard's photo. The caption she uploaded that evening with a picture of her and the scholarship folders was simple: "You can't steal legacy. You can only earn it." The next morning, her mailbox held something new: a certified envelope from a name she hadn't seen in years. Inside, a legal notice. Someone had just filed a motion. And this time, it wasn't Evelyn. The courtroom was colder than Evelyn expected, not in temperature, though the air did hum with institutional chill, but in design. Brutalist concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of acoustic ceiling that made every shuffle of paper sound like thunder. Still, she sat upright on the witness bench, her navy blazer pressed, hands folded in her lap like folded linen, measured and clean. Hallie stood beside her, calm and precise. Her opening statements had already sliced through pleasantries. Now it was Evelyn's turn. "Mrs. Carter," the prosecutor began, "can you walk the court through your role in the McAllister Family Trust?" Evelyn leaned toward the mic. "My husband Richard and I established the trust in 1992. He believed legacy wasn't about money, it was about responsibility. When he died, I became the surviving executor. I honored that position. I managed the funds, maintained the documents, and when my daughter Denise was going through a difficult time, I took in her son Caleb." She paused, looked at the jury. "I raised him for 6 years. I taught him to ride a bike. I made his lunches. I paid for his braces, and I kept every receipt." A murmur swept the room. Hallie placed a large accordion folder on the desk. The prosecutor nodded. "Let's look at some of those now." Screens lit up on the wall behind Evelyn as scanned documents flashed into view. Meticulously labeled spreadsheets, tuition payments, the purchase of Caleb's first used car, insurance, even a copay from a dentist appointment in 2016. A court clerk tapped through each page as Hallie narrated the timeline. It wasn't performative, it was surgical. Then came the video clips, Caleb's mocking voice, auto-tuned and cruel, Denise's smirking denial in her last salon livestream, Caleb's viral insult, "She's just a confused old woman with a grudge and a file cabinet." The courtroom watched in silence. Then Evelyn stood. "I kept those files," she said, "because I knew, eventually, someone might need reminding." Caleb shifted uncomfortably beside his lawyer, dressed in a borrowed suit one size too big. His face was pale, lips tight. The defense attorney motioned for a break, but the judge, an older man with a gravel voice and a no-nonsense demeanor, waved it off. "Proceed." Hallie reached into her briefcase and pulled out a yellowed legal notepad, Richard's. "These are notes written by Mr. Richard McAllister in 1998, she said. "They outline his philosophy on family responsibility, trust integrity, and a handwritten clause, added after Denise's second stint in recovery, about conditional inheritance." Evelyn read the words aloud. "If the ones we love turn selfish, you don't punish them, you protect the others. Legacy is not a bribe, it's a blueprint." A sniffle echoed from the jury box. A woman on the far end wiped a tear with her sleeve. That's when Caleb stood, without being called. "I just want to say something," he said, voice shaking with either nerves or rehearsal. I didn't know it had gotten this bad. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was just confused, and my mom, she said—" He turned toward Evelyn. His face twisted into a halfway apology. "I'm sorry, Grandma." Evelyn tilted her head softly, then reached into her blazer and pulled a printout. She handed it to Hallie, who passed it to the clerk, who loaded it onto the screen. It was a text from Caleb to a friend, dated 2 weeks prior. "If she doesn't give it up soon, I'll just say she's crazy and take it to TikTok again. Old people don't survive scandal." The courtroom went still. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't have to. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. McAllister, you've displayed both moral and fiscal immaturity that would concern any trustee. Your apology, frankly, is as shallow as your hashtags." Then he turned to Evelyn. "Mrs. Carter, you've set a precedent for clarity and fortitude. This court thanks you." As she stepped down, her hand brushed the rail, steady as ever. Outside, the reporters waited. But Evelyn didn't head for the press. She headed to a quiet corner bench where she sat under the courthouse magnolias and pulled out a single index card, a scholarship essay excerpt from a 17-year-old girl named Tasha. "You don't always get to choose your family, but you can choose who you become, even when they fail you." Evelyn smiled. Because someone hadn't failed, someone had paid attention, and in 2 days, Evelyn would get to meet her, in person, as her sponsor, and maybe, just maybe, as her chosen family. The pen felt heavier than it should have, not in weight, but in consequence. Evelyn sat at the dining table, the same oak slab where she once laid out Caleb's third-grade science project, a solar system made of styrofoam and glitter glue. Now the table held legal paperwork, notarized statements, and a fresh draft of her revised will. The title read, "Evelyn L. Carter, Last Will and Testament, Revised." She uncapped the pen and signed. With that signature, Caleb McAllister was formally and legally removed from her estate, disinherited, not with malice, but with certainty. No loopholes, no conditional clauses, just a clear typed line. The aforementioned individual is excluded from all inheritance, with no right to claim nor contest. She handed the file to Hallie, who nodded and placed it into a secure folder marked Final. The next morning, Caleb showed up. Not at the front door, but the back, through the gate, like he used to when he was little and trying to sneak out snacks past bedtime. He wore an oversized hoodie, hands stuffed into his pockets, his usual swagger softened by something less rehearsed. Evelyn didn't let him inside. They stood on the patio, early sun filtering through the pine trees. A wind chime clicked softly in the background. "I just want to talk," Caleb said. "You are," Evelyn replied. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "I'm not recording this. No TikTok. Just me." Evelyn gestured to the chair across from her. He didn't sit. "I know I messed up. he began, but everything got out of hand. Mom panicked. I panicked. I didn't think you'd actually go through with everything. She said nothing. I'm sorry, okay? He continued. I didn't mean for it to turn into this. Evelyn reached down and pressed a small recorder on the table. Beep. Caleb flinched. What the hell? If you're speaking from the heart, she said, you won't mind it being remembered. His mouth opened, closed. No words followed. After a beat, he stormed off, muttering something about manipulative old women and ruining his future. Evelyn turned the recorder off, slipped it into a drawer. Denise arrived 2 days later, unannounced. Her makeup was heavy, her heels too tall for comfort, and her voice too loud at the door. You really want this aired out in front of everyone? She snapped. Because if you keep pushing this, I swear to God, I'll tell them what happened in '94. Evelyn stood still. What happened in '94? She asked, voice steady. You know what I mean. No, Evelyn replied. I think you mean rehab. I think you mean that Christmas I sold my wedding ring to pay your hospital bill after the overdose. Or do you mean when I pawned Richard's watch to cover your first month in recovery housing? Denise's face paled. Go ahead and tell them, Denise. The truth holds up better than spin. Denise hesitated, then turned, heels clacking down the porch stairs, her threats dissolving into the wind like smoke. That night, Evelyn pulled out a photo album. In it, a grainy picture of her outside the diner where she once worked night shifts. A copy of a cashier's check from 2003 made out to Peachtree Women's Recovery Home. A receipt for 2 used mattresses bought the same week she took Caleb in while Denise was finding herself. She slid those photos into a new folder. Title, What Love Paid For. Then she opened her updated will again. One clause read, to bequeath my estate to the RLM Legacy Fund, the Savannah Community Youth Program, and the Chatham County Education Council. She added one final line, and if they ask why there's nothing left for the bloodline, tell them this: inheritance is not owed, it's earned. The phone rang. It was Hallie. There's been movement, she said. Denise just filed something with Elder Services. Looks like she's trying to be reinstated as your state-assigned caregiver. She may be fishing for benefits. Evelyn exhaled, long and slow. Then she stood and walked over to her office, to the safe where she kept the originals. Because if Denise wanted to play games with the state, she'd just stepped into Evelyn's arena. And this time, the gloves were already off. The first lock was mechanical, deadbolt, brass-plated, installed back when Richard still handled the tools. The second was electronic. Evelyn had it installed 3 days after the call from Hallie. The technician, a polite young man with kind eyes and a quiet voice, didn't ask questions, just placed the cameras at her request. Front door, garage entrance, hallway, and, at Evelyn's firm insistence, the storage room at the back of the house. That room held Richard's original ledgers, his pension paperwork, family heirlooms, and more importantly, boxes of notarized trust documents Evelyn didn't trust to exist in digital form alone. On a humid Thursday night, the camera by the side entrance blinked to life. It was just after midnight when Evelyn, still awake with a hot cup of peppermint tea and her notebook open beside her, received the first alert. Motion detected. Garage entry. She tapped the screen, heart steady but pulse elevated. The footage loaded slowly. 2 figures, hoodies, one tall, the other leaner. No gloves, no attempt to avoid the camera. Caleb, and a friend Evelyn didn't recognize. They weren't whispering, they weren't even trying to be discreet. Just grab the box with the green tape, Caleb's voice said. That's where she keeps the originals. My mom says if we get 'em, the court case goes soft. The other boy hesitated. This is breaking and entering, man. No, it's not, Caleb snapped. It's my family's house, my future inside. Evelyn pressed a button on her phone and made a single call. The police arrived 7 minutes later. By then, Caleb and his accomplice had broken open the locked storage door with a crowbar, scattering folders across the floor. They had just begun rifling through the paperwork when red and blue lights flooded the back windows. Police! Hands in the air! Caleb froze, then ran. He didn't make it far. By morning, every news outlet from Chatham County to Augusta carried the same headline: Grandson arrested in attempted burglary of elder's home, caught on camera. The footage wasn't just grainy surveillance, it was crystal clear, backed by timestamps and voice recognition. Caleb's voice, arrogant and unmistakable, looped on every channel. Denise posted bail before lunch, but the damage couldn't be undone. The court slapped Caleb with formal charges: attempted burglary, property damage, and conspiracy. Denise, charged as an accessory for incitement and negligence, was hit with a fine and a warning that further involvement would escalate the situation. Evelyn filed for, and was swiftly granted, restraining orders against both of them. In a statement to the press, she didn't offer a soundbite. She offered a single sentence, delivered on the courthouse steps. Desperation dressed as entitlement is not an emergency, it's a reckoning. The quote trended within hours. By the end of the week, donations to the RLM Legacy Fund tripled. Anonymous checks arrived in the mail, cards from strangers, a bouquet of irises from a woman Evelyn had once mentored through a financial literacy course. The note simply read, "For every locked door you protected, we thank you." The university in Savannah invited Evelyn to speak at their Ethics in Finance conference. Instead of a lecture, she read excerpts from her journals. Quiet, precise recollections of every night she stayed up late adjusting budgets for her daughter, of every missed vacation, of the years she spent doing 2 people's worth of parenting on half a person's strength. When she finished, the auditorium stood. A week later, the dean called again, not to request, but to inform. The university had established a new annual award in her name, the Evelyn Carter Prize for Integrity and Stewardship. It would go to 1 student per year, someone who knew how to protect what mattered. That night, as Evelyn folded laundry and watered the garden, she felt something rare pass through her, something lighter than pride and deeper than relief, peace. But as she refilled the bird feeder near the porch, her phone buzzed. A message from Hallie. Just 1 line. "They've lawyered up. Denise's threatening countersuit claims emotional distress." Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron, then walked inside, and locked the door behind her. Not from fear, but from routine. Some doors, after all, stayed locked for good reason. But some needed to be opened, just wide enough to let the whole truth step through. The article was exactly 842 words, typed in Georgia 11-point font, double-spaced with 3 edits in red pen, and a final line drawn under the closing sentence like a signature that didn't need initials. Evelyn had written it in 1 sitting, the way you might speak directly to someone across a table who finally decided to listen. No legal jargon, no names, just truth. The title read, "Love Isn't Currency. Respect is the only down payment." She submitted it quietly to the Savannah Register's opinion desk. No press release, no PR agent. Just a short note in the email body. From a grandmother who learned too late, but learned. The paper published it the following Sunday. By noon, it had been reprinted in 3 neighboring counties. By dinner time, it had made its way to national teacher forums and parenting blogs. The phrasing was plain. The emotion, raw. We give and give because we love. But love isn't an invoice. It's not a loan. And yet, too often, our children learn to treat our care as collateral, as though what we gave them was a down payment on our silence. I won't do that anymore. Love isn't currency. Respect is the only down payment I'll ever accept again. By Monday, hashtags trended again. Love isn't currency. Down payment of respect guidance counselors reposted it. Social workers printed it. A woman in Kansas turned it into a wall decal for her foster home. Evelyn didn't monitor the buzz. She had already logged off Facebook and Twitter 2 weeks ago. She didn't need applause. She needed clean space. The condo in Savannah was modest. 2 bedrooms, east-facing windows, and a screened-in porch that caught the early morning light just right. She donated nearly everything that didn't fit. The dining table went to a single mother from her church. The filing cabinets were shredded, scanned, then burned. Only 1 folder made the move. RLM Legacy Fund. Active Mentorship Initiative. By late fall, Evelyn began volunteering twice a week at a local community center. The teenage girls she met came in hungry, for structure, for attention, for someone to mean what they said. Evelyn didn't offer advice unless it was asked for, but she showed up, on time, with snacks, with folders, with stories. On Wednesdays, she taught a course called Money with Meaning. The first lesson: if someone gives you $100 and says, "This is for school," and you buy a pair of shoes, that's not just poor spending, that's theft with a disguise. They listened, not because she was loud, but because she was real. Back in Atlanta, Denise's salon closed for good. The utilities had been cut off for over a week before the sign on the door finally changed to "For Lease." Yelp marked the listing closed permanently after a flurry of final one-star reviews citing financial deception and unresolved allegations. Caleb's online presence dried up almost overnight. His last post was a vague apology video with no caption and 0 comments. By then, his friends had scattered. Former classmates he once flexed on in the Charger ghosted him. One even posted a TikTok stitch of Evelyn's courthouse, quote, "Desperation dressed as entitlement is not an emergency, it's a reckoning," with the caption, "She read him like a ledger." He was a punchline now, and punchlines don't get legacy. Evelyn knew that. She didn't need to punish him further. The world was doing that on its own. One afternoon in the center's break room, a girl named Raven, barely 15 and carrying more silence than anyone should, pulled out her worksheet and asked, "Do you ever think love can bounce? Like a check?" Evelyn paused, then smiled. "It can," she said softly. "But respect? That always clears." That night she returned to her condo, lit a small candle beside a framed photo of Richard. The scent was cedar and rosemary, his favorite. She opened her journal and wrote one clean sentence: "I built a family, and then I built a boundary." Her phone buzzed, a message from Hallie. "Court hearing in 2 weeks. Denise is pushing the elder distress countersuit. Her lawyer, bluffing, but you'll need to be present." Evelyn closed the journal. Not weary, ready, because family didn't end at blood, and betrayal didn't end at court. But truth? Truth kept going, and she had one more thing to say. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, the handwriting unfamiliar at first glance, tight, blocky letters shaped like someone who didn't trust cursive. The postmark read, "Atlanta Metro Detention Center." Evelyn didn't open it right away. She placed it on the entryway table beside her keys, where it sat through lunch, through her afternoon mentoring session, and even after dinner, when she stood at the kitchen sink scrubbing out the last traces of pot roast from her Dutch oven. It wasn't until well past dusk, when the porch light clicked on automatically and her slippers were quiet against the tile, that she picked it up again. The envelope was heavier than she expected. 3 pages folded crisply. She sat down at her writing desk, slid her letter opener through the seal, and unfolded the contents. The first line stopped her. "I don't expect forgiveness. I barely expect this to be read." The handwriting wobbled between printed discipline and emotional derailment. It wasn't performative. There were no TikTok-ready turns of phrase, no half-hearted deflections, just Caleb, in his own fractured voice, trying to scrape together coherence from wreckage. He wrote about Denise, mostly in fragments. How she'd always needed him to play adult when she couldn't. How money, once introduced into their bond, felt like both glue and gasoline. How the trust fund had always seemed like a future that owed him something, until it didn't. He mentioned Richard. How he used to think of him as a silent legend. How every time Evelyn said, "Your grandfather would have," it felt like being measured against a ghost he couldn't compete with. And finally, he wrote about Evelyn. "You gave up sleep and comfort and time, and I threw it back in your face like I deserved better. I mocked you online because I couldn't deal with how small I'd made myself feel. I thought if I laughed first, it wouldn't hurt when the world did. Turns out I was wrong. You were right. Every receipt, every boundary, every consequence. I just wasn't raised to think those things would ever apply to me." By the time she finished page 3, Evelyn's hand trembled. Not from rage, not from weakness, but from the unbearable familiarity of regret, something she'd learned to carry without letting it bend her. A tear slipped past her cheekbone, silent and clean. She folded the letter, placed it beside her journal, then opened a new sheet of stationery. Her handwriting was slow, even, precise. She didn't rewrite the will, she didn't soften the scholarship clause, but she did respond. Accountability isn't a gift, it's a mirror. The fact that you're finally looking into one is a start, but it doesn't entitle you to the things you broke. Growth begins when outcomes no longer belong to you. She didn't sign it with love. She signed it with her name. The next morning, she placed both letters, Caleb's and her reply, into a sleeve marked Memoir, Final Chapter Material. 2 days later, her editor called. "I just finished the manuscript," she said, voice a little breathless. "It's a generational gut punch. Fierce, quiet, shattering. I've already sent it to acquisitions." Evelyn blinked. "Do you think people will actually read it?" "Not only will they read it," the editor said, "they'll pass it to their daughters and granddaughters, maybe even their sons." The working title on the manuscript cover read, The Ledger, a story about what we owe and what we don't. By Thursday, a publisher in New York had made an offer. The advance was modest, but the distribution was national. When the paperwork arrived, Evelyn read every word, every clause, every subheading, then signed. That night, she lit a new candle, placed it beside the same picture of Richard, then clicked open a new document on her laptop. Chapter 1. Dedication. She typed, "For the girls who were told to stay quiet, for the women who did everything and were told it was nothing, for the elders who are still teaching us how to draw the line." Then she sat back and smiled, not with triumph, with truth. Because sometimes the real inheritance is the story you finally tell. The check was thicker than expected, not in value but in meaning. It arrived by courier in a smooth cream envelope, the publishing house's logo pressed in gold foil at the corner. Evelyn held it quietly in both hands at her kitchen counter, the way someone might cradle an old photograph. The number was significant, mid-5 figures after taxes, enough to remodel a house, enough to vacation anywhere she wanted, enough to disappear, if that had been the plan. But Evelyn wasn't disappearing, she was building. That afternoon, she called Hallie. Split the royalties and advance between the RLM Legacy Scholars Fund and the Chatham County Youth Development Endowment. No split hairs, no clauses, just direct action. Hallie didn't ask questions anymore. She just said, "Already drafting it." By week's end, the donation had been processed. The foundation, newly restructured with a formal board of directors, was renamed in full, the Richard L. McAllister Foundation for Integrity and Access. Its mission: fund scholarships, mentorship, and transitional housing support for young adults aging out of foster care or surviving financial abandonment by family. A few days later, Evelyn received a letter on thick notebook paper, the kind that frayed slightly at the edges when torn from a binder. At the top, it read, "To Ms. Carter, but I hope someday I can call you Evelyn." It was from Tasha, the girl from Macon, the same one whose application Evelyn had read twice and underlined with a yellow pen. The same girl who had once written, "You don't always get to choose your family, but you can choose who you disappoint last." Tasha's handwriting was looping, uneven, full of nervous rhythm. "I just wanted to say thank you for seeing me when others only saw risk. You didn't just give me money. You gave me a chance to show I could rise. Thank you for seeing me." Evelyn folded the letter slowly and slid it into the pocket of her planner. She'd been invited to Tasha's graduation in May. No fanfare, just a single folding chair under a pop-up tent on a community college lawn. But on the RSVP card, Tasha had checked the box next to "Attending with Family" and written Evelyn's name in the margin. Evelyn circled the date in ink, not pencil. That same week, Hallie finalized the last thread of legal closure. "I've completed the full removal," she said over the phone. "Caleb is now legally excluded from all current and residual trust components, future earnings, and passive dividends. There's no more shadow to chase." Evelyn exhaled. Not dramatically, just fully. She looked across the living room at her new bookshelf. One shelf entirely lined with blue folders from the foundation, another with biographies of American women who refused to fold, and a third shelf blank, waiting. For future names. For future legacy. Later that evening, she unlocked the fireproof file cabinet one last time, pulled out her most current will, flipped past the boilerplate paragraphs and notarized tags, and reached the section labeled Beneficiaries and Legacy Transfer. She struck through the old clause naming family members by default. Then she wrote, firm and clean, all assets, royalties, retirement accounts, and insurance benefits to be transferred in full to the Richard L. McAllister Foundation for Integrity and Access. This foundation is my heir. The young people it serves are my family. This line is not open for revision. No dramatics, no footnotes, just truth on paper. The next morning, Evelyn stood on Tasha's graduation lawn, second row, aisle seat, dressed in a soft cornflower blouse and slacks. The folding chair creaked under her but held. Tasha spotted her in the crowd and smiled like it had been waiting to bloom all year. During the ceremony, Evelyn clapped with both hands and her whole chest. She stood when Tasha's name was called, and when the crowd thinned out and photos began, Tasha walked up, diploma in hand, and asked quietly, "Can I call you Grandma?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She placed one hand over Tasha's and nodded, but as she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. The message preview read, "Ms. Carter, my name is Jonah. I think you knew my father once, and I believe I'm in your book." She stared at it for a moment, then walked toward the parking lot, because some chapters came back, and some doors, once locked, waited quietly to be opened. The email's subject line read, "Caregiver request, status update." Evelyn read it twice before clicking. The words felt clinical, bureaucratic, like someone had slipped poison into a cup of decaf. The sender was from the Georgia Division of Aging Services. Buried in the body of the message was the twist. "We've received a resubmission for designation of familial caregiver status, filed under Denise Carter McAllister. Submission date, June 2nd, includes financial dependency appeal." Evelyn sat back in her chair, blinking slowly. June 2nd. 1 week after Caleb's removal from the trust had been finalized. 1 week after Denise's salon closed. 1 week after everything fell apart. For them. And this was how she tried to crawl back in. Not through an apology, not through remorse, but through paperwork. That afternoon, Evelyn met Hallie at the county clerk's office with one objective, a permanent, no-contact injunction. No future claim of dependency, no cohabitation clauses, no emergency override. Evelyn instructed, "I want this airtight." Hallie didn't argue, just drew up the documents, signed in triplicate, and walked them to the magistrate herself. Within 48 hours, it was done. The state revoked Denise's application and opened a fraud case for misrepresentation of elder dependency. Evelyn didn't gloat, but she did take the call from a state investigator who confirmed the details. Denise had listed Evelyn's Savannah address on the form, claimed to be in daily physical care proximity. She'd even forged a utility bill from the old house. It was sloppy, desperate, familiar. That evening, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with a glass of iced tea and an open envelope beside her, an invitation to appear on a live-recorded podcast episode in Charleston, Modern Elders, Stories of Boundaries and Becoming. She said yes. The studio was small but warm, lit like a bookshop, not a stage. Her chair had a mustard yellow cushion. The mic smelled faintly of peppermint oil. The host, a woman in her 40s with a silver streak in her braid and a notepad full of handwritten questions, welcomed Evelyn like an old neighbor. "You've become a quiet icon," the host said. "Not for fighting, but for finishing." Evelyn smiled gently. "I didn't finish anyone," she replied. "I just finished pretending." She talked about the legacy of paperwork, about grief disguised as duty, about how trust, when misplaced, becomes a weapon, not just against the trustee, but against truth itself. "I had to learn that not every act of love has a return on investment," Evelyn said. "Some things you do because your integrity doesn't allow otherwise, but when someone mistakes your silence for permission, that's when you draw the line." The room was quiet. Then, applause. It wasn't explosive. It was sustained, solid, The kind of applause meant not to praise, but to thank. The host leaned in for one last question. If you could leave one message, one sentence for the generation behind you, what would it be? Evelyn didn't hesitate. Some inherit cash, she said. I inherited clarity. That line would appear in headlines by morning. That night, back in her condo, Evelyn opened the fireproof drawer for the last time. Inside was the original trust document, the very first version, still bearing Caleb's name in blue ink and Denise's in fine print, back when hope had outweighed experience. She lit a match, took the paper outside to the grill, and burned it, page by page, not out of vengeance but closure. She watched the ashes scatter beneath the moonlight, rising with the scent of ink and memory. Then she closed the lid, locked it, and turned to go inside. But before she did, her phone buzzed once. A voicemail transcription. Hi, Ms. Carter, it's Jonah again. I know this is odd, but I think my father might be someone you wrote about. I don't want anything. I just have questions. Could we meet? She stared at the message, and then, very quietly, walked to her desk, pulled out her journal, and wrote at the top of the page, Chapter 15, The Stranger with My Eyes. Because some inheritances don't end in money, some begin with a knock you didn't expect. The morning light in D.C. broke sharp and pale across the windows of the Mayflower Grand Ballroom. Outside, a wind fluttered the flags along Connecticut Avenue. Inside, Evelyn Carter stood in front of a gilded mirror, adjusting the lapels of her blazer and brushing a single wrinkle from her sleeve. Her shoes were black leather loafers, the same pair she'd worn to Caleb's high school graduation, the same pair she'd worn the day she signed the new trust documents. That night, when his spit hit the edge of her shoe and the family turned their faces away, she hadn't spoken. Now they gleamed. She'd polished them by hand that morning, standing in her hotel room with a folded towel underfoot. A final gesture, not of vanity, but of memory. The shoe that had been stained in humiliation now shone in defiance. The MC introduced her softly, reverently. Please welcome Evelyn Carter, author, advocate, and founder of the RLM Foundation, a woman who redefined legacy not through inheritance, but through intention. The applause was polite, until she stepped into the light, then it built, slow and full. Evelyn approached the podium with measured steps, no cane, no hesitation, just her, upright, composed, known. She unfolded her speech and began. When people talk about legacy, they often mean what's left behind. But legacy isn't what you leave, it's what you reinforce every day with your words, your money, your silence, or your refusal to be silent. She paused. The ballroom held its breath. I come from a family that confused love with leverage. That taught me giving and guilt could be part of the same sentence, and I believed it, until I didn't. She spoke about Richard, about raising Denise, about Caleb, yes, but not by name. She referred to him as the boy I once called my future. She didn't offer revenge, she offered reflection. When people take from you and call it love, she said, voice steady, they're hoping you'll stay quiet because they share your blood. But dignity isn't genetic, it's earned, every day. With receipts, with truth, with boundaries. Her hands never trembled, not when she quoted the lines from her book that now lived in classrooms and forums and laminated posters in social worker offices. Some inherit cash. I inherited clarity. Not when she spoke of the night she burned the trust papers and closed the grill, not when she closed her folder and said, I raised them. Then I raised myself. The room stood, not all at once, but row by row. Educators, advocates, grandmothers, survivors. Some clapped, some cried. One young woman in the third row held up her phone, not to record, but just to keep her hand from shaking. Afterward, Evelyn didn't linger in the press line. She returned to the hallway and walked slowly toward the coat room, her loafers making soft, confident clicks against the marble. Later that month, an education reform podcast listed Caleb's case, not by name, but by story, as a cautionary tale about entitlement, digital cruelty, and intergenerational trauma. Parenting forums reposted it. A state-run ethics textbook included excerpts from Evelyn's memoir under the title trust, and consequence. But Evelyn didn't keep track. She was too busy teaching, mentoring, living, not in spite of what had been taken, but because of what she had reclaimed. The condo in Savannah bloomed with small rituals: tea with the girls from the community center on Tuesdays, an annual dinner for scholarship recipients in the spring, letters from Tasha, now accepted into a graduate program in nonprofit leadership, a dog newly adopted, brown-eyed and soft-eared and absurdly loyal. Peace had texture now, scent, shape, and Evelyn, for the first time in decades, lived not in defense of her worth, but in celebration of it. One crisp evening, she sat on the porch with a blanket and her final manuscript draft resting across her knees. She flipped to the last page, typed cleanly in bold italics, "Trust isn't given. It's written and rewritten in every act of grace or cruelty." She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and let the breeze carry it, because this story, her story, had never been about what was owed. It had always been about what was earned.